Two Apache sought shelter. One found the woman he didn't know he needed. Western love tales. The wind whispered through the sparse juniper trees and cacti, carrying the sharp scent of the earth and the promise of an approaching storm. These men had been traveling for days, seeking shelter from both their pursuers and the harsh elements. Their journey had not been easy. Every path they took seemed more dangerous than the last, and yet they pressed forward, guided by instinct, experience, and the quiet understanding of the land that only those born into it could truly have. The first man, tall and lean, had a face marked by the sun and scars that told stories of battles fought long ago. His eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of danger. He had always been quick to act, sometimes too quick, letting his instincts guide him even when caution might have been wiser. The second man, quieter and more thoughtful, rode slightly behind. His gaze lingered on details that others might overlook, a fallen branch that suggested recent travelers, the distant cry of a hawk, or the way the wind shifted. There was a patience about him, a calmness that balanced his companion's impulsive nature. As they rode, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled in, heavy and gray, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the valleys. Rain was coming, and it would not be gentle. The desert, beautiful in its stillness and wide-open spaces, could become unforgiving when the weather turned. These men knew that. They needed shelter, and they needed it soon. Hours passed as they searched the landscape, riding through narrow canyons and across dry riverbeds. Just when hope seemed to fade, the quieter man spotted it. A small cabin nestled at the edge of a creek, partially hidden by the twisted branches of a lone juniper tree. It looked abandoned at first glance, weathered by sun and wind, but the men's instincts told them it was worth investigating. They approached cautiously, weapons within reach but lowered in a gesture of tentative peace. The cabin door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it moved in the wind. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the fading light that seeped through the cracks in the walls. Dust danced in the air, disturbed by the men's movements, and the smell of old wood and dried herbs lingered. It was then that they heard a voice, a soft, steady voice, neither frightened nor aggressive. "Who are you?" the woman asked, stepping into the doorway. She was slight in stature but moved with a quiet strength. Her hair, dark and long, framed a face that had known hardship but had not been broken by it. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied the two men carefully. The taller Apache man instinctively straightened, wary. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We seek shelter from the storm." The woman's gaze flicked to the darker clouds outside and then back to the men. She studied their faces, the way they carried themselves, and saw the weariness etched into every line. After a moment, she nodded slightly. "You can stay," she said, her voice still cautious, "but you will respect my home while you are here." The men nodded in understanding. It was not often they encountered someone who could speak with such quiet authority, yet they sensed immediately that she could take care of herself. The taller man, accustomed to taking charge, felt a rare sense of respect for her independence. His companion, quieter and more observant, felt a different kind of curiosity, a pull toward understanding who she was and how she had survived alone in such a harsh place. Inside the cabin, the storm began to roar outside. Rain pounded against the roof, and wind rattled the windows. The woman moved with practiced ease, gathering firewood and starting a small fire in the hearth. The warmth spread quickly, filling the room with a comforting glow. She offered the men water and simple food, a few dried beans, some hard bread, but there was enough to sustain them until the storm passed. As the night deepened, the men settled into the cabin. The first man, restless and alert, kept one eye on the door and the other on the shadows cast by the firelight. He was used to the dangers of the desert, the hidden threats of rival clans and the unpredictability of nature, but there was something about the stillness of this place that felt different. He did not yet know what it was, but it unsettled him in a way he had not expected. The quieter Apache man, on the other hand, allowed himself to relax slightly. He observed the woman as she moved around the room, noting the careful way she handled the fire, the way she arranged her few belongings, and the quiet strength in her posture. He sensed that her life had been shaped by loss and struggle, yet she had retained her dignity and resilience. There was something in her that drew him in, not merely curiosity, but a deeper recognition of shared endurance. Conversation began cautiously. The woman asked questions about their journey, their clan, and how they had come to be traveling alone. They answered honestly but without revealing more than necessary. Stories of the desert, of survival, and of small victories over hardship filled the room. Slowly the tension eased. The fire crackled, shadows danced on the walls, and for a few hours the cabin became a refuge not only from the storm outside but also from the challenges of the world beyond its walls. Despite the growing trust, there was still a careful distance. The taller Apache man was wary of forming any attachment, knowing the fragility of life on the open plains. The quieter man, however, felt a subtle shift within himself, a spark of connection that he had not anticipated. He noticed the way the woman's eyes softened when she spoke of the land she loved, the way her hands worked with care as she prepared food or tended the fire. In her quiet ways, she was teaching him patience and observation, showing him that strength could be gentle and that trust, once earned, was a gift not lightly given. Outside, the storm raged on. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the rugged landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. Thunder rolled across the valleys, shaking the very earth beneath them. Yet inside the cabin, a fragile sense of safety and companionship began to form. The three of them, strangers at the beginning of the day, had become, in some small way, a team, a temporary family bound by circumstance, survival, and an unspoken understanding of each other's needs. By the time the storm began to subside, night had fully fallen. The desert, washed and glistening, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The wind had calmed, and the first hints of dawn would soon touch the horizon. The two Apache men knew that their journey was far from over. They would have to leave eventually, return to the lands they called home, and face the challenges waiting for them there. But in that quiet cabin, warmed by the fire and shared stories, they experienced something rare, a sense of human connection in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. And for the quieter Apache man, a subtle, unfamiliar feeling had begun to stir, a curiosity, a fascination, perhaps even the beginnings of something deeper. He did not yet understand it fully, but he sensed that this woman, whom he had only just met, might change the course of his journey in ways he could not yet imagine. The first night passed without incident. Each of them slept in different corners of the cabin, but sleep was lighter than it might have been elsewhere, cushioned by the presence of others who could understand struggle, endurance, and survival. Outside, the desert continued its timeless rhythm, but inside, the beginnings of a story had taken root, a story of trust, resilience, and the possibility of unexpected bonds forming even in the harshest of lands. When morning finally arrived, light poured through the cracks in the cabin walls and the storm had passed. The desert, cleansed and sparkling, seemed almost alive with new possibility. The two Apache men prepared to continue their journey, but neither of them could ignore the subtle shift that had taken place within the cabin the night before. Something had begun here, a fragile, unspoken connection between them and the woman who had opened her home to strangers. As they stepped outside, stretching limbs stiffened from the night, the quieter man stole one last glance at the cabin. He saw her standing there, looking out over the creek, her hair catching the early sunlight. A strange warmth filled him, and he realized he had found something he did not know he needed, a presence that grounded him, challenged him, and drew him closer to the understanding that life, even in its harshest forms, could still surprise him with moments of unexpected beauty. And so, with the storm behind them and the open desert ahead, the two Apache men mounted their horses, ready to face the next stage of their journey. But for one of them, the journey had already begun, not across the desert but within his own heart, where the first seeds of trust, connection, and perhaps even love had quietly taken root. The morning sun warmed the desert, casting long shadows over the rocky ground. The storm from the night before had left the land fresh and alive, with puddles reflecting the sky and birds cautiously emerging to inspect their surroundings. The two Apache men and the woman who had sheltered them spent the morning quietly repairing what little the storm had disturbed in the cabin. Broken roof shingles were reset, the fire pit cleaned, and a small garden patch tended where a few hardy vegetables had survived the harsh desert weather. The taller Apache man worked quickly, moving with strength and precision. His hands were rough from years of labor and travel, yet there was a carefulness in the way he handled the fragile seedlings in the small garden. The woman observed him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had spent many months living alone in this cabin and had learned to rely on her own skills. She did not often let others into her space, but there was something about these men, something different from strangers she had met before. The quieter Apache man moved with patience, helping the woman arrange supplies and repair a broken window shutter. He noticed small details, the way the wood had cracked in the storm, the way the wind whistled through the cracks, and the gentle sway of the branches outside. He worked without rushing, respecting the woman's space and allowing her to guide the repairs as she saw fit. In return, she began to trust him, seeing that he was not only capable but also considerate. As the day went on, conversation started slowly. At first it was small talk, the weather, the storm, and their travel plans. But soon it deepened. The woman spoke of the desert, how she had learned to read its signs, find water, and protect herself from danger. Her voice carried the weight of experience, but also a quiet pride. She did not seek sympathy or admiration. She simply shared the knowledge that had kept her alive. The taller Apache man, as usual, was impatient with long conversations. He listened politely, but often interrupted with practical suggestions or observations, wanting to focus on the tasks at hand. The quieter man, however, stayed close to the woman as she spoke, asking gentle questions that encouraged her to share more. He wanted to understand her world, the land she loved, the routines she had established, and the challenges she had faced. Slowly, a subtle bond formed between them, based on respect, curiosity, and the shared understanding of survival. By mid-afternoon, they took a break. The woman brought out a small bundle of dried herbs and beans and prepared a simple meal over the fire. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the warmth and the smell of food cooking. Eating together, they began to share stories. The woman spoke of her family, lost to a past raid, and how she had learned to fend for herself. Her words were steady, without bitterness, though the sadness lingered just beneath the surface. The taller Apache man shared tales of battles and survival in the desert. His voice was commanding, yet there was a flicker of respect for the woman's resilience. He spoke of the ways his people had adapted to the harsh landscape, the importance of knowledge passed down through generations, and the value of strength and courage. She listened carefully, recognizing the truth in his words, though she remained cautious of his bold, impulsive nature. The quieter Apache man shared less about himself at first, focusing more on listening. But as the hours passed, he began to reveal small pieces of his life. Times when patience had saved him, moments when observation had prevented disaster, and the quiet strength that guided him in difficult moments. The woman noticed the difference between the two men, their approaches, their temperaments, and the way they treated her with respect. She began to feel a subtle warmth toward the quieter man, a recognition of a kindred spirit who valued her skills and respected her independence. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the three of them took a short walk along the creek near the cabin. Water flowed gently over smooth stones, reflecting the colors of the sky. The woman pointed out the plants and herbs that grew along the banks, explaining their uses for medicine, food, and survival. The quieter Apache man listened intently, fascinated not only by the knowledge but by the calm and confidence with which she spoke. He realized that she had lived a life full of challenges, yet had retained her dignity and self-reliance, a combination that intrigued him more than he expected. The taller man, however, grew restless. He walked ahead, scanning the surrounding land for danger. He was protective, not only of himself but of the others, yet his need to assert control sometimes created tension. The woman noticed this and, while appreciative of his vigilance, found comfort in the quieter man's calm presence. She sensed that he would not rush or impose, but would instead move in harmony with the land and with her. As evening approached, the storm clouds that had passed the night before returned, though less violently. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending ripples across the creek. The woman suggested they return to the cabin before the weather worsened. Inside, the fire was rekindled, and the three of them settled into a quiet routine. The taller man continued his practical tasks, repairing and reinforcing parts of the cabin. The quieter man helped her prepare food and maintain the fire, working alongside her with patience and care. Conversation that evening was softer, more personal. The woman spoke of her dreams, small hopes for safety, and the desire for companionship after years of solitude. Her words were not a plea but a quiet sharing of her heart, revealing vulnerability in a way that was rare for her. The quieter Apache man listened, offering gentle observations and thoughtful comments. His respect and understanding were apparent, and she felt a growing sense of trust. The taller Apache man, sensing the bond forming between the woman and his companion, grew quiet. He understood the subtle dynamics, though he rarely expressed emotions openly. Instead, he focused on practical matters, ensuring the cabin was secure, that food supplies were adequate, and that the fire burned steadily. Yet even he could not ignore the gentle shift in the atmosphere. The quieter man and the woman were forming a connection built on trust, shared effort, and mutual respect. Night fell over the desert once more, and the three of them settled for sleep. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls of the cabin. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the desert seemed alive with quiet sounds, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and the soft gurgle of the creek. Inside, the atmosphere was one of fragile peace. The quieter Apache man found himself unable to sleep immediately. He watched the woman, seeing her face softened by firelight, her hands resting calmly on her knees. He felt a strange warmth, an unspoken connection that surprised him. It was not yet love, not in the way he fully understood, but it was a recognition of someone who had endured much and yet remained strong, someone whose presence brought him unexpected comfort. The woman, too, found herself thinking of him. There was a gentleness in his ways, a patience that contrasted sharply with the harshness of the world outside. She felt cautious, as she always did, yet also curious, a quiet fascination with someone who seemed to understand the balance between strength and care. The taller man slept soundly, unaware of the quiet emotional currents flowing between the other two. He had always faced life head-on, relying on strength and action, yet even he felt a subtle relief in the presence of the woman and the quieter man. There was safety here, a temporary haven in a land that rarely offered it. Morning arrived with the soft glow of sunlight spilling over the desert. Birds chirped from the trees, and the air smelled of fresh earth and water. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a land cleansed and renewed. The three of them prepared for the day, aware that the journey beyond the cabin would eventually call them onward. Yet for now, they shared another day of cooperation, learning, and quiet companionship. Tasks continued: repairs to the cabin, gathering firewood, preparing food. But now there was a sense of shared rhythm. The woman allowed herself small moments of relaxation, while the quieter Apache man offered silent support, never rushing or imposing. Their bond deepened through these simple acts, the unspoken understanding that emerged from shared effort and mutual respect. The taller Apache man began to notice the subtle bond forming. He did not interfere, understanding that some connections could not be forced. Instead, he focused on the practical needs of survival, occasionally offering guidance or assistance, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding desert. By evening, as the sun dipped low once more, they shared a meal together, the warmth of the fire and the quiet companionship easing the lingering tension from the past days. Laughter, small and genuine, began to fill the cabin as they recounted minor mishaps and the oddities of desert life. For the first time, the three of them felt not like strangers brought together by circumstance, but like companions who had begun to understand one another. The quieter Apache man realized something important. He had not expected to feel this way, yet he did. He respected and admired the woman, not only for her skills but for the resilience and dignity she carried despite her hardships. He could see that she, too, had begun to notice him in ways that were subtle yet undeniable. There was a quiet tension, gentle and unspoken, growing alongside the practical routines of survival. And so, the second day in the cabin came to a close. The fire dwindled, the desert night settled around them, and for a brief, precious time, they were safe. Not only safe from the elements but from the loneliness and hardship that had marked their lives. Bonds had begun to form, trust had begun to grow, and the quiet stirrings of something deeper, perhaps even love, had taken root in the hearts of two who had not expected it. They slept that night with a newfound sense of hope, unaware of the challenges the desert and the world beyond would soon bring, yet confident that together, they could face them. In a land defined by survival, danger, and solitude, they had found something rare: understanding, companionship, and the beginnings of a connection that neither had known they needed. The morning air in the desert was crisp and filled with the scent of rain-washed earth. Sunlight filtered through the sparse clouds, casting soft shadows across the rocky terrain. The two Apache men and the woman had risen early, each of them tending to their small tasks before the day grew hot. The taller man checked the horses, ensuring they were fed and ready for any journey that might lie ahead. The quieter man helped the woman gather herbs and water, moving with the same patient care he had shown since the first day. The night's quiet had allowed the three of them to rest, but the desert never remained still for long. Memories, long-buried worries, and the weight of their past surfaced in moments of silence. The woman, while preparing a small breakfast over the fire, began to speak softly of her past. She did not speak out of sorrow, but out of necessity, as if sharing her story could lighten the burden she had carried alone for so many years. She spoke of her family, the friends she had lost, and the ways she had learned to survive in a land that could be both beautiful and cruel. The quieter Apache man listened attentively, his eyes never leaving hers. He asked gentle questions, not to pry but to understand. He wanted to know how she had learned to live so fully, despite all the hardships. Her answers were calm and thoughtful, showing a strength that impressed him deeply. Every word she spoke revealed not only survival but wisdom, and he found himself drawn to her in ways he could not yet fully explain. The taller Apache man, meanwhile, maintained a practical focus. He admired her independence, but he found the quieter man's patience and attentiveness unusual. He had lived much of his life acting first and thinking later, relying on instinct, and he saw that this quieter man had a different kind of strength. It was subtle but powerful, a strength that did not need to show itself in action alone. As the morning moved into afternoon, the woman suggested they explore the area around the creek. The storm from the previous days had left the ground soft and water flowing in unexpected places. Together, they walked carefully, the woman pointing out plants that could be used for food, medicine, and even shelter. The quieter Apache man followed closely, absorbing every detail. He admired not only her knowledge but the way she moved through the land, like she was part of it, connected to every rock, tree, and ripple of water. The taller man, as always, took a more protective stance, scanning the surrounding land for danger. He understood the desert's threats all too well, from rival clans to sudden wildlife encounters. His vigilance, though sometimes overbearing, was grounded in experience. The woman appreciated his watchfulness, but felt a growing comfort in the quieter man's presence. His calm attention made her feel seen and understood without pressure or expectation. As they ventured further, the woman began to share small stories of the past, moments when she had survived near disasters, learned the tricks of the land, and built her life alone. Her voice was steady, never seeking pity, yet her words carried the weight of lived experience. The quieter Apache man responded with stories of his own, not of battles or grand exploits, but of patience, observation, and the times when subtle choices had kept him safe. Their shared understanding of life's hardships created a quiet bond that neither had expected. The taller Apache man occasionally interrupted with practical advice or warnings, but even he could see the connection forming. It was unspoken, subtle, and based on respect rather than words. The woman noticed it as well and felt a strange mix of caution and curiosity. She had lived alone for so long that trust came slowly, yet something about this man, steady and thoughtful, allowed her to consider it. Late in the afternoon, the three returned to the cabin to rest and prepare for the evening. The woman began gathering herbs for medicine, while the quieter man assisted, his movements careful and deliberate. Their shared tasks allowed them to communicate without words, a rhythm forming between them that was natural and comforting. Even the taller man noticed it, choosing not to interfere, understanding that some connections could not be forced or hurried. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the desert's colors deepened into rich oranges and purples. The taller man tended to the fire and secured the cabin, while the quieter man and the woman sat near the hearth, continuing their quiet conversation. She spoke of her hopes, not grand dreams, but small wishes for safety, companionship, and the possibility of a life less burdened by fear. He listened, offering thoughtful responses that acknowledged her strength while also providing gentle support. The evening grew quiet, with only the soft crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the desert. Outside, shadows moved across the ground, and the wind whispered through the trees. The taller Apache man fell asleep first, exhaustion from travel and constant vigilance finally catching up to him. The quieter man remained awake a little longer, watching the woman as she tended to the fire. There was a subtle beauty in the way she worked, efficient, precise, and yet gentle. He realized that he had begun to feel something more than respect or admiration. It was a feeling that surprised him, something he had not anticipated in the harsh and unpredictable life of the desert. The woman, too, noticed the quiet attentiveness of the man beside her. She felt a sense of ease in his presence, a trust that had grown without force or expectation. It was unusual for her. She had learned to depend on herself and rarely allowed others close. Yet something about his quiet strength and steady demeanor made her consider the possibility of companionship, not out of necessity, but because it felt natural. Night fell fully over the desert, and a blanket of stars spread across the sky. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls of the cabin, creating a sense of warmth and security. For the first time in a long while, the woman felt a measure of peace, knowing that the men she had sheltered were not only allies but people she could trust. The quieter Apache man, lying awake and listening to the gentle rhythm of the night, felt a deepening connection as well. The desert, usually a place of constant vigilance, had become a space where hearts could open quietly and cautiously. As the night progressed, memories of past struggles surfaced for all three. The woman remembered the loss of her family and the loneliness that followed. The taller Apache man thought of battles fought and friends lost. The quieter man reflected on the challenges of life on the plains, the need for patience, and the rare moments of connection that had shaped his journey. Though each memory carried weight, the presence of the others offered comfort and understanding. In this shared silence, they were no longer simply survivors. They were companions navigating life together, even if only for a brief time. By dawn, the desert had transformed once more. Light spilled over the cliffs and valleys, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth. The storm had passed completely, leaving the land fresh and vibrant. The three of them emerged from the cabin, stretching their limbs and preparing for the day ahead. Though their journey was far from over, the bond they had begun to form provided strength and encouragement. The quieter Apache man and the woman worked side by side, tending to the small tasks of the cabin, sharing knowledge, and offering quiet support. Their cooperation was effortless, a rhythm born of respect and mutual understanding. Even the taller man, observing them, felt the subtle shift in their dynamic. He recognized that some things could not be forced. Friendship, trust, and connection had to grow naturally, and in this moment they were doing so. Later in the morning, the three decided to explore further into the canyon nearby. Water from the creek had pooled in small areas, creating a temporary oasis. The woman pointed out edible plants and herbs, explaining their uses with quiet authority. The quieter Apache man absorbed every word, fascinated by the knowledge and the calm confidence with which she spoke. They walked together, a subtle bond forming through shared experience, cooperation, and the quiet joy of mutual understanding. The taller man remained vigilant, occasionally scanning the canyon walls and distant ridges for any signs of danger. His presence was protective, ensuring the safety of the group, yet he allowed the connection between the quieter man and the woman to grow without interference. It was a rare recognition of the balance between action and patience, strength and subtlety, and it underscored the uniqueness of each individual's approach to survival. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon, the three returned to the cabin. The fire was relit and they prepared a simple meal together. Conversation that evening was softer, more personal. The woman spoke of small hopes and desires, safety, trust, and companionship. The quieter Apache man responded with thoughtful words, acknowledging her resilience while offering gentle encouragement. Their connection, subtle yet undeniable, grew stronger with each passing day. Night fell, and the desert was silent except for the distant sound of the creek and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The taller Apache man slept, weary from vigilance and travel. The quieter man remained awake longer, watching the woman as she tended the fire. In the quiet, they shared an understanding that needed no words, a recognition of shared strength, trust, and the beginnings of something deeper. The third day in the cabin drew to a close. The fire dwindled, shadows danced across the walls, and the desert night settled over them. In this space, safe from the harshness of the world beyond, the two Apache men and the woman had found a rare sense of peace. Bonds had deepened, trust had grown, and the quiet stirrings of affection had begun to take root. For all three, the desert no longer felt as lonely or unforgiving as it had before. In each other's presence, they had discovered companionship, understanding, and the beginnings of connection that neither had expected but all welcomed quietly and sincerely. The desert morning was unusually quiet, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. The air carried the faint scent of sagebrush, and the sun rose slowly over the rocky horizon, turning the cliffs a deep golden color. The two Apache men and the woman had begun their day with the usual routines, tending the fire, preparing a small breakfast and checking the horses, but an undercurrent of tension hummed beneath the calm. Each of them felt it, though none spoke of it aloud. The taller Apache man had noticed tracks in the soft earth near the creek. They were faint but clear enough for someone experienced to recognize. Another group had passed through recently. His instincts told him to be cautious, yet he said nothing at first, observing how the quieter Apache man and the woman went about their tasks. He did not want to alarm them unnecessarily, but his protective nature kept him alert. The quieter Apache man, attuned to subtle signs in the land, had also noticed the tracks. Unlike the taller man, he did not immediately assume danger but considered the possibilities carefully. He watched the movement of the trees, the direction of the wind, and the behavior of nearby animals. Something in his training told him that the group passing through might be scouts or travelers, not necessarily hostile, but the desert often held surprises. The woman sensed the tension, though she did not know its cause. She had lived alone in the desert long enough to recognize that small details often mattered. She noticed the way the men moved, the careful glances they cast around the cabin, and the sudden stillness in their actions. She did not question them directly, instead observing and preparing herself quietly. She trusted her instincts, as she always had, and she had learned that caution could mean the difference between safety and danger. By mid-morning, the three had finished their preparations and decided to explore the surrounding area. The creek, swollen slightly from recent rains, had created pockets of fresh water and patches of green vegetation that stood out in the otherwise arid landscape. The woman led the way, pointing out edible plants, hidden water sources, and areas where small animals might be found. The quieter Apache man followed closely, absorbing every detail, while the taller man scanned the land from the back, ever vigilant. Their exploration was interrupted when movement caught their attention. A group of riders appeared on the distant ridge. At first, it was unclear whether they were friends or foes. The taller Apache man's hand went to his weapon instinctively, but the quieter man raised a calm hand, signaling patience. They observed silently, careful not to reveal their presence. As the riders approached, it became clear that they were hostile scouts from a rival clan. Their presence confirmed the unease that had been simmering since morning. The taller man's mind raced, thinking of strategies to protect themselves, while the quieter man remained steady, considering options carefully. The woman, sensing danger but unwilling to panic, moved closer to the quieter man, finding comfort in his calm demeanor. The group retreated to the cabin, moving quietly but swiftly. Inside, the three began to prepare for what might come. The taller man reinforced the doors and windows, placing furniture in strategic positions. The quieter man and the woman gathered supplies, food, water, and essential tools, ready to move if necessary. Though fear lingered, it was tempered by the trust they had built over the past days. They knew they could rely on one another. As the sun climbed higher, the hostile riders drew closer. The desert, usually so open and free, felt confining, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The taller man's vigilance intensified, while the quieter man focused on subtle signals, the rustle of leaves, the movement of dust, and the distant sounds of horses. He began to devise a plan, one that relied not only on strength but on careful observation and patience. The woman, observing both men, realized how differently they approached danger. The taller man relied on immediate action, a display of strength and readiness. The quieter man relied on thought, strategy, and understanding of the environment. She felt her respect for the quieter man grow, as she recognized that his patience and intelligence could guide them through a perilous situation without unnecessary risk. Hours passed with the hostile riders drawing closer, and tension thickened in the cabin. Every sound outside made the three flinch: the snapping of a branch, the distant call of a hawk, even the shift of dust on the rocks. Yet amidst the fear, there was also a quiet determination. Each of them understood that survival depended not only on skill and strength, but on the trust and cooperation they had developed. Finally, the riders arrived near the creek, dismounting and scouting the area. The taller Apache man considered confronting them directly, but the quieter man suggested a different approach. They would wait, observe, and act only when necessary. Patience, he knew, could prevent needless danger. The woman agreed, quietly supporting his plan. Together, they monitored the movements of the rival scouts, sharing subtle signals and glances that communicated readiness without words. As the day progressed, it became clear that the scouts were not aware of their presence. The three remained hidden, moving with caution, and the tension slowly transformed into a tense focus. The quieter man's plan relied on misdirection and subtle positioning rather than confrontation. He guided the woman to a hidden path that could provide an escape if needed, while the taller man prepared the horses and ensured that supplies were ready. Even in the face of potential danger, small moments of connection appeared. The woman and the quieter Apache man exchanged glances, silent acknowledgement of the trust and respect that had grown between them. She noticed the steadiness in his eyes, the calm determination that balanced the taller man's impulsive energy. For the first time, she felt the possibility of something beyond mere survival, a quiet companionship that might endure even when danger had passed. The hostile scouts began to move on, unaware of the cabin they had passed. The taller man allowed himself a brief sigh of relief, though he remained cautious. The quieter man and the woman relaxed slightly, knowing that the immediate threat had passed. Their shared experience had tested their cooperation, patience, and understanding of one another, and it had strengthened the bond between them. As evening approached, the desert returned to its usual quiet. The three emerged from the cabin to tend the fire, prepare food, and reflect on the day. The woman spoke softly of the dangers they had faced, her words steady and measured. She acknowledged the courage of both men, noting how each had contributed in different ways. The taller man had acted decisively, protecting them when necessary. The quieter man had guided them with strategy and insight, ensuring that action was taken only when safe. The fire crackled as night fell, casting warm light across their faces. The quieter Apache man and the woman sat close, sharing quiet conversation and occasional smiles. Though the taller man was present, he gave them space, understanding the subtle connection that had grown. It was a bond built not on words alone, but on shared experience, trust, and mutual respect. As the night deepened, memories of past struggles resurfaced once more. The woman thought of the years she had spent alone, surviving without anyone to rely on. The quieter Apache man reflected on his own journey, the lessons of patience, observation, and the rare moments of connection that had shaped him. Even the taller man, usually focused on action and survival, considered the unusual bond forming between the other two. They settled for the night, the fire burning low and the desert quiet around them. Sleep came slowly for some, while others rested with the comfort of companionship. The events of the day had tested their courage, patience, and trust, and though the danger had passed, the experience left a lasting impression. Each of them had learned more about the other, their strengths, their character, and the ways they faced adversity. The desert, with all its beauty and danger, had shaped them. The storm, the days of travel, and the unexpected threat from the rival scouts had forced them to rely on one another. In doing so, they discovered qualities in each other that went beyond survival, qualities of courage, patience, understanding, and even quiet affection. The fourth day in the cabin came to a close with a sense of calm. The fire's warmth filled the small space, and shadows danced on the walls. Outside, the desert stretched wide and silent, holding secrets and stories of those who had walked its land before. Inside, the three of them rested together, knowing that while the journey ahead would bring more challenges, they were stronger for having faced the day as a united group. The quieter Apache man, watching the woman as she moved about the cabin, realized that the connection he felt had deepened. It was not just admiration or respect, but a growing recognition of something rare and meaningful. The woman, in turn, noticed the steadiness and patience he offered, a counterbalance to the impulsive energy of the taller man. Both recognized that their bond was built not only on shared survival, but on mutual understanding and trust. The taller Apache man, though exhausted, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had protected them, ensured their safety, and witnessed the formation of a bond that was subtle but strong. He understood that some things could not be forced, only allowed to grow naturally. And in this quiet desert cabin, the three of them had found something precious: trust, companionship, and the beginnings of connections that could endure beyond the trials of the land. As they drifted to sleep, the desert night enveloped them in its vast silence. The stars shone brightly overhead, and the cool wind whispered through the trees. The events of the day had tested their courage and patience, yet they had emerged stronger and more connected. In the harsh desert, where survival was never guaranteed, they had found not only safety but understanding, trust, and the first quiet stirrings of deep emotional connection. The morning sun rose gently over the desert, painting the rocky landscape with soft gold and amber light. The storm from days before had long passed, leaving the earth washed clean, the air fresh, and the desert alive with a quiet energy. The two Apache men and the woman awoke with a sense of calm, yet each carried thoughts of the journey ahead. Though their time at the cabin had been temporary, it had left a lasting mark on all three of them. The taller Apache man was the first to stir. He checked the horses, making sure they were ready for travel, and adjusted their saddles and supplies. Even after the dangers of the previous day, he remained alert, knowing the desert could change at a moment's notice. His protective instincts were as strong as ever, but he also allowed a small measure of relief to enter his heart. The immediate threat had passed, and they were stronger for having faced it together. The quieter Apache man helped the woman with breakfast, moving in his usual steady, patient way. He watched her as she gathered water from the creek, noting the careful efficiency in her movements. She had grown even more confident and comfortable in his presence, and he had grown increasingly aware of the feelings stirring within him. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a bond built over days of survival, shared work, and subtle emotional connection. Neither had spoken of it openly, but both knew it existed. The woman, for her part, noticed the growing warmth and attentiveness of the quieter Apache man. It was not just kindness, but a deeper sense of respect and care that went beyond words. She had spent much of her life alone, learning to rely only on herself, and had rarely allowed anyone to enter her inner world. Yet with him, there was something different. She trusted him, relied on him, and even found herself smiling more freely than she had in years. They prepared for the day's travel with quiet efficiency. The taller man ensured the cabin was secure, checking windows, doors, and provisions. The quieter man helped the woman pack her supplies, while also preparing food and water for the journey ahead. Even in these practical tasks, a rhythm had developed, a silent communication and understanding that made their cooperation effortless. As they mounted their horses and began moving across the desert, the landscape stretched endlessly before them. Rocky ridges, small canyons, and patches of green oasis appeared and disappeared in the distance. The desert was unforgiving, yet it held a strange beauty, one that both tested and rewarded those who traveled its paths. Each of them felt the weight of the journey, but also a sense of hope and possibility, strengthened by the bond that had formed between them. During a pause near a small water hole, the taller Apache man spoke first. "We should stick to higher ground for a while," he said, scanning the horizon. "It's safer and we can see anyone coming from a distance." His voice was steady, commanding attention without demanding it. The quieter Apache man nodded, agreeing with the plan. "We'll stay alert but move calmly," he said. "No need to rush or draw attention." The woman listened closely, contributing her knowledge of the land, hidden paths, safe water sources, and sheltering spots. Together, they formed a plan that balanced caution with efficiency, combining their different skills and experiences. As they traveled, conversation grew easier. The woman spoke of her hopes for the future, not extravagant dreams, but simple desires: safety, companionship, and a life where she could continue her work in the desert without constant fear. The quieter Apache man listened intently, offering thoughtful responses and gentle encouragement. He shared small pieces of his own story, reflecting on the lessons he had learned, the value of patience, and the rare moments of connection that made life meaningful. The taller man occasionally joined in, sharing practical advice and anecdotes from his own experiences. Though his words were often focused on survival, he also contributed humor and insight, lightening the mood and reminding them all of the importance of perspective. Together, they walked through the desert not merely as travelers, but as companions who had come to understand and respect one another deeply. By midday, the heat began to rise. The sun blazed overhead, casting sharp shadows across the rocks and sand. They paused in the shade of a rocky outcrop, resting the horses and taking water. In this quiet moment, the woman turned to the quieter Apache man. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, words were unnecessary. The connection they had been nurturing over days of shared experience was clear, understood without explanation. The taller Apache man noticed the glance but chose not to comment. He had come to respect the bond forming between the two. There was no threat, only understanding, and he recognized that some things, trust, care, and affection, could not be rushed or forced. His focus remained on practical matters, ensuring the safety of all, while quietly supporting the growing closeness between the quieter man and the woman. As the afternoon wore on, they reached a safe valley, sheltered by cliffs and trees. The land was fertile, with a gentle creek running through it, offering water and the possibility of a place to stay for a time. They decided to rest and make camp, allowing the horses to drink and graze. The woman moved with practiced ease, gathering firewood and setting up a small cooking area. The quieter Apache man helped her, and the taller man arranged their temporary shelter and secured the perimeter. In the calm of the valley, conversation turned personal. The woman spoke of her gratitude for their help, noting how the quieter Apache man had been patient, observant, and protective without being overbearing. She expressed admiration for the taller man's courage and vigilance. The quieter man responded with quiet humility, acknowledging that their survival had been a team effort. The exchange was simple but heartfelt, reinforcing the trust and respect that had grown between them. As evening fell, the desert sky turned a deep purple, and stars began to emerge. They shared a meal around the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cool desert night. Laughter and light conversation filled the air, a contrast to the tension and uncertainty of the past days. The woman and the quieter Apache man shared glances and smiles, their unspoken bond growing stronger with each passing moment. The taller man, sensing the quiet closeness, gave them space, choosing instead to reflect on the journey and the lessons learned. He recognized that not all strength was shown in action. Some strength was quiet, patient, and steady. In this way, he appreciated the value of both types of courage, the bold and immediate and the calm and enduring. Night deepened, and the desert settled into silence. The fire crackled softly, and the three of them felt a sense of peace. The dangers of the past had tested them, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and closer than before. The quieter Apache man realized that he had found something unexpected, a connection that went beyond survival, built on respect, understanding, and shared experience. The woman felt similarly, recognizing that she had found not only safety and companionship, but also a quiet love that had grown naturally over time. Morning came, bringing light and warmth to the valley. They prepared to continue their journey, knowing that the path ahead would bring more challenges. Yet now, they were ready to face it together. The quieter Apache man and the woman rode side by side, their bond evident in the ease of their conversation and the subtle gestures of care. The taller man followed close behind, vigilant but at peace, understanding that the connection he observed was genuine and deserved space to flourish. They traveled for several days, moving cautiously through the desert, stopping only when necessary to rest or gather water. During this time, the woman and the quieter Apache man continued to deepen their bond. They shared stories, helped each other with practical tasks, and offered comfort in moments of fatigue or frustration. Their connection was not loud or dramatic, but quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in mutual respect. The taller man occasionally joined their conversation, offering guidance or advice, but he also allowed the bond between the woman and the quieter man to develop without interference. He understood that some things in life, trust, affection, and companionship, could not be forced, only nurtured. In this way, the three moved forward as a team, united by experience and strengthened by understanding. Eventually, they reached a small settlement at the edge of the desert. The woman considered staying for a time, perhaps to rest and gather supplies. The quieter Apache man stayed close, offering support and companionship. They spoke quietly of the future, recognizing that while the desert was harsh and unpredictable, it had brought them together in ways they could not have imagined. The taller man, knowing his own path lay elsewhere, prepared to continue his journey alone. He offered a firm handshake to the quieter Apache man and a respectful nod to the woman, acknowledging the bond that had formed and wishing them well. Though they would part ways, the lessons and trust forged in the desert would remain with all three. The quieter Apache man and the woman watched him leave, then turned to face the future together. They knew the desert had tested them, challenged them, and shaped them, but it had also brought them to a place of understanding, respect, and quiet love. For both, the journey was no longer just about survival. It was about the connection they had discovered, and the life they could now imagine building together. As the sun set over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the desert, the two of them stood together, side by side. The wind whispered through the rocks and trees, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and water. They had faced storms, danger, and the vast, unpredictable desert, and yet they had emerged stronger, united by trust, respect, and the quiet beginnings of love. In the harsh lands of the West, where survival was never guaranteed, they had found something far more precious: companionship, understanding, and hope for the future. And so, the journey continued, not just across the desert, but into a life shared together, built on the experiences, trust, and connection that had grown naturally over days of challenge, discovery, and care. The story of their survival had become a story of love, quiet and steady, forged in the unlikeliest of places and under the harshest of skies.